the $20 gun that experts laughed at, then saved the Battle of the Bulge. The mud is alive. That's not a metaphor. In the Hürtgen Forest on the German border in November 1944, the mud is a sentient, malicious entity that consumes everything the American army tries to throw at it. It crawls into boots and turns socks into wet concrete. It finds its way into truck engines and cracks the blocks. It seeps into foxholes and turns bedrolls into cold, heavy slabs. And it kills guns. Sergeant Mike Omali is sitting in his foxhole at 6 in the morning, scraping mud off his weapon with a frozen fingernail. The sound coming from the German side of the forest is the terrifying, rhythmic rip of MP-40 submachine guns and the occasional deep bark of artillery. The trees above his head are topped, stripped of branches by shell fire, and the freezing rain is falling straight down through the skeletal pine trunks like a curtain of ice. He's holding a Thompson submachine gun, the legendary Tommy gun, $200 worth of hand-machined American steel and polished walnut. The weapon of gangsters and G-men and paratroopers. The weapon that looks like it belongs in a glass case. He pulls the charging handle back. It grinds. The bolt doesn't move smoothly. It stutters against something inside the action. A grain of sand, a smear of the dark, greasy clay that is everywhere in this hellish forest. And Omali knows with cold certainty that if a German patrol walked out of the mist right now, his beautiful, legendary $200 weapon would probably fire one shot before turning into an 11-pound steel club. He has slept with this gun inside his sleeping bag for 3 nights in a row. 3 nights of pressing it against his body to keep it warm, to keep it dry. 3 nights of treating a firearm like a sick child. The mud still found a way in. The mud always finds a way. Somewhere out in the gray rain, a German submachine gun opens up. That distinctive sound, fast, mechanical, almost casual, the sound of a weapon that doesn't care about the mud. And Omali looks at his jammed Thompson and feels a fury so deep it has no bottom. This is the crisis nobody talks about when they talk about the winning the war. The American army in late 1944 is winning on maps and losing in the mud. And somewhere back in Washington, in a building that doesn't smell like cordite and frozen earth, someone is about to do something so radical, so cheap, so insulting to every soldier in the field that the men will laugh when they first see it. They won't be laughing long. This is the story of the M3 submachine gun, the grease gun, the Woolworth Special, the cake decorator, the ugliest, cheapest, most mocked infantry weapon in American military history, and the gun that held the line at the Battle of the Bulge. But before we talk about what this weapon could do, we need to talk about why it existed at all. Because the story of the grease gun isn't really about a gun. It's about what happens when you strip away everything that doesn't matter and keep only what does. It starts with a problem that nobody in peacetime could have predicted. The Thompson submachine gun is, by any objective measure, a masterpiece of American gunmaking. It's machined from solid steel billet. Every component fits to tight tolerances, meaning the gaps between moving parts are measured in thousandths of an inch. On a clean shooting range, this produces a weapon of remarkable smoothness and accuracy. The bolt glides. The trigger breaks crisply. The magazines feed without hesitation. But those tight tolerances, the very thing that makes the Thompson beautiful, become a death sentence in the mud. Because tight tolerances mean tiny gaps. And tiny gaps mean that a single grain of sand, a single smear of clay, a single drop of moisture freezing at just the wrong moment can stop the mechanism cold. The Thompson isn't just a gun that jams in bad conditions. It's a gun that was fundamentally designed for conditions that don't exist at the front lines of a winter campaign. The soldiers figured this out the hard way. They spent hours cleaning their Thompsons. Precious hours that should have been spent sleeping, eating, or preparing for the next German attack. They used their dry socks, their only dry socks, to wipe down the bolts. They slept with the guns against their bodies. They covered them with their jackets in the rain, and the guns still jammed. Meanwhile, the German army is carrying the MP-40. It isn't as pretty as the Thompson. The finish isn't as smooth. The machining isn't as precise. German soldiers didn't love their MP-40s the way American GS loved their Thompsons. But the MP40 worked. In mud, in rain, in snow, in freezing cold. It worked with a reliability that drove American soldiers insane because they could hear the difference, that distinctive burping rattle of German automatic fire, while they were kicking their Thompsons trying to get the bolt to close. The American Army is facing a fundamental contradiction. Their doctrine, the thing they've spent years perfecting, is built on firepower. Suppress the enemy with overwhelming fire. Pin them down. Let the riflemen maneuver. It's a sound doctrine. It's the right doctrine. But you cannot suppress anyone if your submachine guns are paperweights. The problem isn't just reliability. It's cost. It's time. It's scale. Machining a Thompson takes days of skilled labor and specialized equipment. The result is a weapon that costs $200 in 1944 money. That's the price of a decent used car. And the United States Army needs millions of submachine guns. Not hundreds, not thousands. Medium. Because this isn't a professional army of career soldiers equipped with handcrafted heirlooms. This is a conscript army of 6 million men who need weapons immediately, who need them to survive in conditions that would destroy those heirlooms within a week. The math is brutal and simple. You cannot equip 6 million soldiers with weapons that cost $200 each, take days to make, and require a jeweler's level of care to maintain in combat conditions. The Army looks at the British Sten gun and the German MP40 and reaches a conclusion that would have horrified any pre-war gunmaker. Stamped sheet metal is the future. Not because it's elegant, because it's fast to build, cheap to produce, and easy to replace when it breaks. So the Ordnance Department puts out a request. Give us a submachine gun. Don't care about looks. Don't care about what stocks or fine finishes. Don't care about tight tolerances or smooth actions. Give us a lead hose that costs less than $20 and can be stamped out like a car fender on an assembly line. The guide lamp division of General Motors, the people who make headlights, get the contract. Nobody in the infantry knows any of this. Sergeant Omali doesn't know about the procurement contracts or the manufacturing philosophy or the economics of equipping a mass army in the modern age. He just knows that a supply truck has struggled up the muddy track and stopped near his position. He trudges back through the mud, boots sucking with every step, hoping for winter boots or maybe some dry ammunition. The supply sergeant is prying open a long wooden crate with a crowbar. He has the expression of a man who just opened his birthday present and found a bucket of wet sand. Omali looks inside. Gray, steel, tubes. That's the only way to describe them. They look like something from a plumber's van or an automotive workshop. No wood anywhere. No sights to speak of. No finish. The metal is rough, pressed together from two halves and welded down the middle like a cheap bicycle frame. The welding seams are visible, crude, industrial, functional. There is no charging handle. Instead, there's a hole in the side of the bolt. A hole. You stick your finger in it and pull backward, like starting a primitive engine by cranking it by hand. Omali picks one up. It rattles. Actual rattling. The kind of sound that makes you think something fell off or broke during shipping. The tolerances between the moving parts are not measured in thousandths of an inch. They're measured in fractions of a millimeter. Visible gaps. Deliberate gaps. What is this? He asks. M3 submachine gun. The supply sergeant reads off the tag. Cost the government $20. Made by the guide lamp division of General Motors. A pause. The weight of that sinks in. The guys who make headlights? The same. Take it. Orders are to swap out the Thompsons. Omali walks back to his squad, carrying the gray tube. He has jumped into Normandy. He has fought through Holland. He is an elite paratrooper of the 82nd Airborne. And the United States Army has just handed him something that looks like a reject from an industrial machine shop. The reaction is immediate. Volcanic. One private asks if they're fixing the plumbing. Another looks at the shape, the crude pressed steel receiver, the wire stock that's just a bent rod of thick metal, and says it's not a gun, it's a grease gun. The kind used to pump lubricant into truck axles. The name spreads down the line like fire in dry grass. Grease gun. Within an hour, every soldier in the sector is using it. Someone else calls it the cake decorator. Someone calls it the Woolworth special, implying it's a toy bought at a discount store. The jokes multiply. Men hold it up next to their cleaned, polished Thompsons for comparison and shake their heads with the mournful expression of soldiers who feel they've been abandoned. The mockery covers something darker. These men know, with the intimate knowledge of people whose lives depend on their weapons, that they are in constant danger. The Germans across the tree line are equipped with quality gear. The MP-40, the terrifying STG-44 assault rifle, a weapon so far ahead of its time that it's redefining infantry combat in real time. And here are the Americans, the industrial giant of the world, the country that can produce more steel in a month than Germany can in a year, fielding a weapon that looks like it was assembled from scrap metal in a garage. It feels like someone decided they were disposable. Like the arithmetic of mass mobilization has reduced American soldiers to a dollar value, and that value is less than the cost of a proper gun. Omali strips the grease gun down. What he finds inside is either terrifying or liberating, depending on your perspective. There's almost nothing to it. No complex locking lugs. No intricate dating both. No elaborate spring systems. Inside the stamped steel tube is a single heavy steel bolt, a dense cylinder of metal, sitting in front of two heavy springs. That's it. The operating principle is called blowback, and it's about as primitive as firearms mechanics get. You fire a round. The explosion pushes the bullet forward and simultaneously pushes the heavy bolt backward. The bolt compresses the springs. The springs push the bolt forward again, stripping the next round from the magazine and chambering it. Over and over, as long as you hold the trigger and there are rounds in the magazine. There are no precisely fitted components. No tic tolerance machining. The bolt doesn't glide through the receiver so much as it crashes back and forth inside it, controlled by physics and mass rather than engineering finesse. Loading the magazine is miserable. The single feed design means you have to force each round straight down against a heavy spring. By the time a magazine is full, your thumbs are aching. In freezing weather with numb fingers, it borders on torture. The ejection port cover is a flap of metal. You open it, the gun is ready to fire. You close it, the gun is safe. There are no safety mechanisms to speak of. No grip safeties or manual safeties or disconnectors. It's either loaded and flapped open or flapped closed. Soldiers try to trade them away. Cartons of cigarettes. Captured German Lugers. Winter coats. But nobody wants a grease gun. Even the tankers, men who will normally accept any weapon they can get their hands on, look at the M3 and shake their heads. As night falls over the Hürtgen, the temperature drops. Freezing rain turns to sleet. The mud hardens into a rocky, uneven crust. Omali sits shivering with the cold steel of the M3 across his knees. He misses the walnut stock of his Thompson with a physical longing. That weight was security. This hollow tube feels like a toy. But out in the darkness, the Germans are moving. Elite panzer grenadiers forming up for an assault, carrying precision weapons, wearing warm winter camouflage. They know the Americans are tired. They know the lines are thin. They know the Americans are cold and their morale is shaken. What they don't know about is the $20 tube from General Motors. What they don't know, what nobody yet knows, is that ugliness has a quality all its own. Omali checks the ejection port flap. Closed. Checks the magazine. 30 rounds of heavy .45 caliber ammunition. Same bullet the Thompson fires. A fat, slow slug that hits like a flying brick. He prays the springs will work in the cold. The test is coming out of the trees, and it's wearing field gray. The first time Sergeant Omali fires the grease gun in anger, or rather, the first time he fires it deliberately, happens not in combat, but in a test session behind the lines. The squad, still sulking about their new garbage weapons, sets up a row of empty ration cans against a demolished stone wall and decides to see what this thing actually does. With the Thompson, pulling the trigger produces instant, violent drama. 800 rounds per minute. A blurring mechanical buzz that empties a 30-round magazine in 2 seconds flat. The recoil is aggressive. The muzzle wants to climb toward the sky. It fights you, requires you to wrestle it down, to clamp the stock into your shoulder and lean into it like you're fighting a living animal. When Omali pulls the trigger on the M3, nothing happens for what feels like an entire second. Then the heavy bolt slams forward with a mechanical thunk, an industrial sound, not a weapon sound, and the gun begins to fire. But it doesn't scream. It doesn't buzz. It cycles with a slow, heavy rhythm that sounds almost apologetic. 450 rounds per minute, barely half the speed of the Thompson. The men look at each other. One private says it sounds like an old tractor trying to start on a cold morning. Another says the gun fires so slow you could pull the trigger, smoke a cigarette, and then watch the bullet hit the can. But Omali is watching the cans. With the Thompson, the first bullet hits the target. The second usually flies high. The third and fourth are in the dirt behind it. The muzzle climb is relentless. Suppressing a target with a Thompson requires constant muscular effort. Leaning forward, gripping hard, fighting the physics of a fast-cycling weapon. With the grease gun, the muzzle doesn't move. He watches the impact points. They're clustered, grouped, the size of a dinner plate. He fires a longer burst, trying to understand what he's seeing. The slow cycling means the bolt's rearward travel absorbs the recoil before the next round fires. The straight-line design, stocked directly behind barrel, no angle, no offset, means the recoil pushes straight back into his shoulder rather than rotating the muzzle upward. The gun wants to stay on target. He realizes he could write his name in the mud with the impact points. At full auto, the laziness of the gun is the secret weapon. It fires slowly enough to be controlled. A 30-round magazine lasts 4 seconds instead of 2, meaning you can suppress a target for twice as long without reloading. The slow rate of fire isn't a flaw they forgot to fix. It's a deliberate engineering choice, a weapon designed not for dramatic firepower, but for sustained, controllable suppression in the hands of a scared 19-year-old who hasn't slept in 4 days. Then comes the mud test. The weather in the Hürtgen turns from miserable to impossible. The temperature drops below freezing, turning the mud into a sticky, half-frozen glue with the consistency of setting concrete. The Thompsons begin dying in droves. The tight machining that makes them so accurate also makes them catastrophically fragile in these conditions. A smear of grit in the locking mechanism converts a $200 weapon into a steel batten. Soldiers spend hours cleaning them, using dry socks, shirt tails, anything absorbent, only to have them jam after the first shot. Omali looks at his grease gun, already caked in filth, and decides to conduct an experiment that would horrify any gunsmith. He finds a can of motor oil in a maintenance vehicle, mixes it with a little kerosene to keep it from freezing. He pours the sludge directly into the ejection port of the M3. No cleaning first, no wiping down. He just floods the action with an oil and grime mixture the way you'd lubricate a squeaky gate hinge. The gun drips. It looks disgusting. He pulls the cocking handle back. It grinds against the grit inside the receiver, the sound of metal fighting dirt. He points the gun at a tree stump, pulls the trigger. The heavy bolt slams forward, crushing whatever dirt sits in its path, and the gun roars to life. It doesn't care. The tolerances are so loose, the gaps between moving parts so deliberately wide, that the grit simply gets pushed aside. There's nowhere for it to lodge, no precise clearance to fill, no tight channel to clog. The bolt is essentially a steel battering ram that moves back and forth with enough mass and force to smash through contamination rather than being stopped by it. The grease gun isn't precision equipment. It's a farm implement, and a little bit of dirt doesn't stop a tractor. Omali gathers his squad. He orders them to put their Thompsons away and pick up the plumbing supplies. The training session that follows is short and brutal. Not because there's much to teach, but because the adjustment isn't mechanical. It's philosophical. He teaches them to embrace the slowness, to stop fighting the rate of fire and use it, to walk fire onto the target, watching where the bullets land, adjusting aim in real time, the way you direct a stream of water from a garden hose. He shows them how the slow cycling means the barrel doesn't overheat as fast, how they can maintain suppression for longer intervals, how a squad of 5 men with grease guns can lay down a wall of fire that effectively denies an entire tree line to the enemy. He teaches them to stop treating it like a rifle and start treating it like a tool, not something to be loved or polished, something to be fed. The first real test comes 3 days later during a reconnaissance patrol near a shattered village. Fog reduces visibility to 50 yards. The squad is moving through a demolished pine grove when they walk directly into a German patrol. Both sides see each other simultaneously. Both sides are reacting purely on instinct. A German machine gunner opens up from behind a log pile. The MG-42, the weapon American soldiers call Hitler's buzzsaw, tears through the branches at chest height. The distinctive sound of fabric ripping at impossible speed scatters the Americans into the dirt. Usually this is where the squad is in serious trouble. Return fire with Thompsons, get off a quick burst, duck for cover while frantically clearing a jam, lose the initiative while the Germans maneuver. It's a pattern that's gotten men killed. Omali rolls behind a tree and brings the grease gun up. No clear sight picture. Doesn't matter. He pulls the trigger and holds it. The slow firing cycle begins. That industrial thudding, not a weapon sound but a factory sound. He sweeps the muzzle across the log pile. The heavy .45 caliber slugs smash into rotting wood, blowing chunks of timber into the air. He keeps the trigger pinned. The German gunner, trained to recognize the rhythm of American weapons, the short burst, then silence, then the scramble to reload, waits for the pause. The pause doesn't come. The grease gun keeps firing, chewing wood, driving splinters, creating a continuous suppressive pressure that the German gunner can't ignore. The gunner flinches, keeps his head down. Omali's men see the enemy head go down. They open up with their own M3S. The sound is unlike anything in this forest. Not the angry buzz of a firefight, but a rhythmic industrial pounding, a factory floor operating at full capacity. The air fills with heavy lead moving at a pace that seems almost leisurely compared to the German weapons. But the volume is relentless. The magazines last longer. The men can maintain fire intervals that would be impossible with faster cycling weapons. They create a sustained wall of fire that overwhelms the German position through persistence rather than intensity. The German patrol breaks contact and pulls back. When a shooting stops, Omali checks his weapon. Smoking. Hot. Action caked in mud from where he dropped it during the initial contact. He pulls the bolt back. It's smooth, moves freely. He looks at his men. They're not laughing anymore. They're looking at the ugly gray tubes with a new expression. Not love. You don't love a shovel, but something more durable than love. Respect. They've stopped thinking about the weapon they wanted and started understanding the weapon they have. The disposable nature of the grease gun isn't an insult. It's a liberation. Bent magazine. Throw it away and get another. Wire stock twisted out of shape. Hammer it back with a rock. Ejection port cover cracked. Open it and leave it open. The anxiety of maintaining a precision instrument in a slaughterhouse evaporates because there is no precision instrument to maintain. What they have instead is a tool. And tools don't need to be perfect. They just need to work. The minor skirmish in the fog is just the warm-up. The calendar turns to December. Snow begins to fall, burying the mud under a foot of white powder. The temperature drops to real zero, Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that seizes metal and turns exhaust breath to ice crystals before it clears a man's lips. The entire front goes quiet. Allied commanders look at their maps, look at the intelligence reports, look at the weather, and conclude that the Germans are finished for winter, settled into their defensive positions, waiting for spring like reasonable people. The word passes down through the command structure. Quiet Christmas expected. The men can rest. The crisis is over. Omali doesn't trust the silence. He keeps his squad drilling in the snow, reloading with frozen fingers, mittens on, mittens off, both ways until muscle memory takes over. Clearing the action with a boot heel when fingers won't cooperate. He makes them practice in the dark, by feel alone, because he knows that if combat comes, it won't announce itself in daylight with good visibility. The grease gun is perfect for this. The trigger guard is enormous, deliberately oversized, designed by engineers who understood that soldiers fight in gloves. The cocking handle operates with enough mechanical advantage that a man can cycle the action with a boot if his hands are too frozen to grip. There are no fine motor operations required. No small buttons. No delicate levers. It is, in the most literal sense possible, a winter weapon. On the morning of December 16th, the world ends. It starts with a low rumble felt in the chest before it's heard by the ears, the ground trembling. Then the horizon to the east becomes a continuous sheet of orange fire as the greatest artillery barrage the Western Front has seen since D-Day erupts along an 80-mile front. The Battle of the Bulge has begun. Hitler has gathered the last reserves of the Third Reich, 29 divisions, nearly 300,000 men, over 1,000 tanks, and launched them through the Ardennes, the very place Allied intelligence dismissed as impassable in winter, the very place they left lightly defended. The American line begins to crumble almost immediately. Radio reports scream of breakthroughs. Units being overrun. King Tiger tanks, 70 tons of steel, armor thick enough to stop a .50 caliber round, armed with a deadly 88 mm cannon, grinding through positions that were supposed to be rear area. Supply lines cut. Artillery silenced. The comfortable assumption of an approaching Allied victory dissolving in real time. Omali and his squad are on the extreme edge of the line, watching the tree line to their east dissolve under the impact of tank shells. The snow around them jumps and kicks as artillery walks toward their position. The sound of the German assault, the mechanical thunder of massed armor, the overlapping crackle of small arms, the distant screaming of men, is unlike anything they've heard. This isn't a probe or a local counterattack. This is everything the Germans have left. Out of the smoke and snow come the shapes of monsters. King Tiger tanks, painted white for winter camouflage, grind forward through the pines, their massive tracks crushing frozen earth, their turrets scanning methodically for American positions. Behind them, using the tanks as moving cover, come the infantry, not the old men and teenage conscripts they've been fighting for the past weeks. These are SS Panzer Grenadiers, veterans, men who fought on the Eastern Front, who've survived things that would have broken ordinary soldiers, who move with the terrifying discipline of people who've long since stopped being afraid of individual bullets. They carry STG-44 assault rifles, the weapon that is at this moment in history the best individual infantry arm on the planet. They carry MP-40s and MG-42s. They have warm winter gear, hot food in their stomachs, and the absolute certainty that they are about to tear a hole in the American line that cannot be repaired. The platoon lieutenant runs down the line. His face is the color of the snow. They're coming straight up the gut. Hold until armor can get there. Omali looks at his men. They're terrified. Of course they're terrified. They can see the tigers through the trees. They can count the gray figures moving through the snow, dozens, then hundreds. They look at their little stamped steel tubes. $20 guns against King Tigers. It seems not just hopeless, but absurd. But Omali has been in the force for weeks. He has watched the grease gun in the mud and the cold. He knows something about this weapon that the officers in the rear with their clean Thompsons don't know. He grabs a fresh magazine, slaps it home, tilts the gun, and pours oil sludge directly over the bolt. Looks at Private Miller, a kid who arrived as a replacement 3 weeks ago, who is shaking hard enough that his helmet is rattling against his steel pot. Listen to me. His voice cuts through the artillery noise. They have better tanks. They have better rifles. But they don't have this trash. This trash doesn't freeze. This trash doesn't stop. When they get close, you don't aim. You just hold that trigger down and you let the tractor eat. You hear me? You let it eat. Miller nods, grips the wire stock of his M3. The first wave of German infantry emerges from the smoke at about 100 yards. They're moving fast, firing their MP-40s and STG-44s from the hip, confident, expecting the Americans to break. They've been told the Americans are undergunned and demoralized, that the line will crumble on contact. Omali waits. 90 yards. 80. He can see the condensation of their breath now. See the SS runes on the collar patches. He kicks the ejection port flap open with his thumb. The grease gun clunks into battery, and he waits just a moment longer. The moment the experts would say is too late. The moment where everything is on the line. Then he squeezes the trigger. The German assault hits the American position like a tidal wave breaking against the seawall. The snow around the foxholes explodes with German rifle fire. MG-42s traverse the American line at a rate that makes the air itself seem solid. The sharp crack of STG-44 assault rifles mixes with the deeper report of tank cannons to produce a wall of sound so complete and overwhelming that individual men stop being able to think and operate purely on training and instinct. A group of 6 SS Panzer Grenadiers detaches from the main assault force and sprints toward Omali's flank. They're using burning trees as cover, moving in bounds, communicating with hand signals. Professionals executing a flanking maneuver with mechanical precision. They carry STG-44s, the best assault rifles in existence, and they know how to use them. Omali watches them hit an open patch of snow at 60 yards. He doesn't use the sights. In this chaos, with the gun smoking and his hands shaking from cold and adrenaline, the crude peephole sight on the M3 is useless anyway. He looks over the barrel the way you'd point a finger. Squeezes. The heavy bolt slams forward with that distinctive industrial thud. The first round hits the snow in front of the lead German, throwing up a white geyser. Omali doesn't stop, doesn't adjust his grip. He nudges the barrel upward slightly and lets the slow, controllable cycling of the gun do the work. The second round, the third, walking the fire up. The fourth round hits the lead German in the chest. A .45 ACP bullet weighs twice as much as a German rifle round. At 60 yards, the impact is devastating in a simple, physical way. Not the fragmentation and tumbling of high-velocity rifle rounds, but the raw kinetic energy of a heavy lead slug moving with the authority of a thrown brick. The German soldier doesn't stagger. He is knocked backward, off his feet, into the snow. Omali swings the muzzle right without releasing the trigger. The slow, rhythmic pounding continues. He steers the stream of bullets the way you'd steer a stream of water from a garden hose. No fighting the muzzle rise. No compensating for a climbing barrel. The straight-line design, the heavy bolt, the deliberate cycling speed, all of it conspires to keep the weapon exactly where he points it. One by one, the gray shapes drop into the white snow. He doesn't jam. The cold that is thickening the oil in the German weapons, causing bolts to stick, springs to slow, rounds to misfire, means nothing to the M3. The tolerances are too wide for ice to seize the action. The bolt is too heavy for a partially frozen spring to slow it. The grease gun gets worse care and better results in direct proportion to how bad the conditions become. To his left and right, his squad opens up. The sound is extraordinary. Not the frantic buzz of a firefight, but a rhythmic, industrial chorus. A dozen grease guns cycling at 450 rounds per minute, filling the air with the cadence of a factory shift starting up. The magazines last 4 seconds instead of 2. The men can fire, assess, fire again, maintain sustained suppression through intervals that would require multiple reloads with faster weapons. The SS Panzer Grenadiers, men who have advanced through Russian artillery barges and fought hand-to-hand in Stalingrad cellars, begin to hesitate. They're used to the rhythm of American firefights. Short burst. Pause. Reload. Short burst. They know how to exploit those pauses to advance during the silence, to close the distance while the Americans are scrambling with magazines. But the pauses aren't coming. The wall of fire doesn't stop, doesn't slow, doesn't have the rhythmic breaks that trained infantry know how to exploit. It just continues, relentless and almost mechanical, like a piece of industrial equipment that doesn't know it's supposed to run out. The Germans take cover. The immaculate flanking maneuver stalls behind logs and in shell craters. Their own weapons are starting to fight them. The STG-44's precision gas system requiring oil that has thickened to paste in the cold, the MP-40's tight action starting to resist the frozen lubricant, while the American plumbing supplies keep chugging along, indifferent to the temperature, getting better the more they're used because the heat generated by firing thaws the oil in the receivers. Omali burns through his first magazine. The bolt locks back on empty. He reaches to his ammunition pouch, grabs a fresh magazine, hand-loaded with bleeding thumbs during the night before the assault, slams it home with the heel of his palm, pulls the cocking handle, and is firing again in 3 seconds. He sees a group of SS troops preparing a flanking maneuver to the right. They've thrown smoke grenades. The gray cloud billows up from behind a snowbank. He can't see them. Doesn't matter. He knows where they have to be, knows the geometry of the approach, knows the narrow corridor of ground between the burning tank and the fallen pine. He turns the grease gun toward the smoke and holds the trigger. 30 rounds at waist height into the cloud. He hears screaming through the smoke. The flanking maneuver dies in the snow. The battle descends into the most primal form of infantry combat. Range drops to 20 yards, then 10. Men are fighting from foxholes, from behind tree trunks, from ditches. At these distances, the grease gun transforms completely. It's short and handy, far more maneuverable in tight spaces than a rifle or a carbine. The wire stock, which seemed so flimsy and ridiculous in the depot, proves its worth here. It keeps the weapon compact, allows it to be fired from awkward positions, doesn't catch on equipment or tree branches. Private Miller, the kid who was shaking so hard his helmet was rattling before the assault, doesn't shoulder his weapon when a German soldier jumps into the trench line 3 positions down. He tucks the wire stock under his arm and fires from a hip. The grease gun chatters. The German soldier drops before he hits the ground. Miller doesn't celebrate. He slaps in a fresh magazine and goes back to watching his sector. All along the American line, the expensive precision weapons are failing. Thompsons are seizing. Bar gunners are kicking their bolt handles with their boot heels, trying to force frozen actions open. M1 Garand receivers are caked with ice-mud mixture that resists every attempt to clear it. Men are throwing down their issued weapons and picking up rifles from the dead, German and American both, because at least a rifle's simple, single-shot mechanism can be cleared and reloaded manually. But the men with the Woolworth specials are the anchors. The M3s are ugly, scratched, caked in mud that's been there so long it's become part of the finish. The stamped steel receivers are dented. The wire stocks are bent. The paint has burned off the barrels from sustained firing. They're still shooting. Omali runs low on ammunition. He shouts for a resupply. A runner crawls up through the fire with a crate of loose, dirty cartridges. Not even preloaded magazines, just loose rounds that need to be hand-loaded. Omali grabs handfuls and jams them into empty magazines while the battle continues, thumbs bleeding from the cold and the sharp feed lips of the magazine bodies. He can't feel the bleeding. He doesn't feel much of anything except the mechanical rhythm of loading and the simple imperative of keeping the gun fed. Because that's what the grease gun asks of you. Not skill, not delicacy, not careful maintenance or precise technique. Just feed it. The King Tigers, stripped of their infantry screen by the relentless grease gun fire, begin to lose their tactical coherence. A tank without infantry support is half-blind. The crew can see what's directly in front of the main gun and nothing else. The bazooka teams and tank destroyer crews that the German infantry was supposed to suppress are free to maneuver. A bazooka team, 2 men who've been hiding in a spider hole for 20 minutes, waiting for their moment, pops up on Omali's left flank. 1 man shoulders the tube. The other drops a rocket into the open rear. The King Tiger presents its thinner side armor, still thick by any normal measure, but thinner than the nearly impenetrable front glacis at a range of 50 yards. The rocket hits. The Tiger shudders like a living thing. Smoke pours from the engine deck. The tank grinds to a halt. The crew hatches open. Men bail out into the snow. Omali and his squad cut them down before their boots touch the ground. The German assault stalls, then breaks. The survivors, not as many as started this attack, pull back through the smoke and the burning trees, dragging their wounded, leaving behind equipment and the precision weapons of the Third Reich frozen and scattered in the snow. The elite Panzer Grenadiers, who left their lines expecting to roll through a demoralized, undergunned rabble, have been turned back by men with $20 stamped steel tubes. When the shooting stops, the silence is absolute. Smoke drift from Omali's M3. The paint on the receiver is blistered and peeling from the heat of sustained fire. The wire stock is bent at an angle that wasn't there before the battle. The welding seam running down the receiver has a new dent in it where the gun was slammed against the foxhole wall at some point during the close quarters fighting. Omali looks at it, this thing that he cursed and mocked, and tried to trade away for a carton of cigarettes. Private Miller walks over. He wipes his nose with a dirty mitten. He looks at his own M3 with the expression of a man who has reconsidered a fundamental opinion. "Sarge," Miller says, "I think I burnt the barrel out. I put 10 magazines through it without stopping." Omali takes the gun from him, rattles the bolt. It moves loosely, the way it always has, the way that used to seem like a defect. He pulls the trigger once, letting the bolt slam home with that solid, reassuring impact. "It's fine, kid," he says. "It's just broken in." The officers arrive later that afternoon in clean jeeps with clean uniforms and clean weapons. They look at the spent brass around the foxholes. It looks like a cartridge factory exploded. And at the smoking hulks of the King Tigers and the bodies in the snow, and they ask how a ragged line of exhausted infantry held off an armored assault by SS Panzer Grenadiers. Omali doesn't give them a tactical briefing. He just points to the gray tube sitting on a sandbag. The officers look at the $20 gun and the burning $1 million tanks and scratch their heads. The reputation of the grease gun flips overnight. The soldiers who called it the Woolworth Special start calling it Old Reliable. The tankers who refused to take one 2 weeks ago are now trying to steal them. The tank crews realize what the M3's designers always knew. A submachine gun for armored vehicle crews has to be short, because the inside of a Sherman tank is not a spacious environment. The wire stock that collapses makes the grease gun tiny. You can tuck it under a seat, hang it near the hatch, keep it within reach for the moment you have to bail out of a burning tank in a hurry. When that moment comes, and it comes more often than anyone wants to think about, you don't want a long, heavy rifle. You want a short hose that you can grab with one hand. The men who laugh the loudest become the fiercest hoarders. The engineers at Guide Lamp look at the reports coming back from the front and decide the M3 isn't simple enough. They study the cocking handle, the pencil sharpener thing on the side, the hole you stuck your finger into. It's a moving part. Moving parts can break, so they remove it entirely. The new model, the M3A1, has no cocking handle at all. To cycle the action, you stick your finger directly into a hole bored through the bolt itself and pull backward. It's as primitive as starting a lawnmower by grabbing the blade. But it's also one fewer moving part, one fewer thing to break, one fewer thing that can jam at the worst possible moment. It is the ultimate expression of the philosophy that created this weapon. If it isn't there, it cannot fail. The war ends in May 1945. The confetti falls. The parades happen. Sergeant Omali turns his M3 in at a depot in France, tosses it onto a pile of thousands of others. It clatters against the steel heap. Just another piece of stamped metal in a mountain of surplus. He figures he'll never think about it again. He's wrong. 5 years later, the temperature drops again. Not the Ardennes this time. The Chosin Reservoir in Korea. The American Army is fighting Chinese forces in weather so cold it freezes the oil in trucks, so cold that men's boots freeze to the ground when they stand still. The new M1 and M2 carbines, the modern replacements for wartime weapons, are failing catastrophically. The gas pistons freeze solid. The lightweight bolts, designed for efficiency rather than mass, don't generate enough kinetic energy to smash through the ice forming in the receivers. Men are fighting with weapons that won't fire. Someone opens old supply crates left over from the Second World War. The grease guns roar to life. The heavy .45 caliber slugs smash through the quilted cotton uniforms of the Chinese assault waves. The slow, rhythmic firing echoes off frozen mountains. Once again, when the high-technology gear fails, the ugly plumber's tool holds the line. A second generation of soldiers becomes believers, and it still doesn't stop. The grease gun goes to the jungle. Vietnam, where the humidity rots with stocks and the red clay dust jams the early M16 rifles. Tank crews and tunnel rats love it. The tunnel rats, especially. The men who crawl into Viet Cong tunnel systems armed with a pistol and a flashlight, doing work that defies every rational calculation of self-preservation. The M3 fits in a tunnel. It's short. It doesn't snag on the packed earth of the tunnel walls. The suppressor variant, a version with a built-in silencer integrated into the barrel, becomes a legend. Whisper quiet, a ghost gun in the dark, chugging along while jet fighters scream overhead. It stays in the American inventory through everything. The Army transitions from the Garand to the M14 to the M16. From Jeeps to Humvees. From steel pots to Kevlar helmets. From slide rules to computers to GPS systems. The grease gun outlasts them all, lurking in the back corners of armories, clipped to the walls of vehicle interiors, stuffed under tank seats. Because there's nothing cheaper that does its specific job as well. No modern weapon that combines the M3's simplicity, reliability, compactness, and sheer indestructibility at anywhere near its cost. It is the cockroach of the American arsenal. It survives budget cuts and modernization programs and neglect because nothing can kill it. Not bureaucracy, not obsolescence, not the contempt of people who judge weapons by how they look in the showroom. The final vindication arrives in 1991. Operation Desert Storm, the most technologically advanced military operation in human history to that point. Stealth fighters that don't appear on radar. Laser-guided bombs that fly through specific windows. M1 Abrams tanks that kill targets at 2 miles while moving at 40 miles per hour. A force so technologically dominant that it destroys the 4th largest army in the world in 100 hours. But look inside the recovery vehicles. The M88 tank retrievers. The HEMTT heavy trucks. The maintenance and support vehicles that keep this technological marvel operating. Clipped to the interior walls, tucked under seats, hanging from cargo nets. The M3 grease gun. 47 years after Sergeant Omali scraped mud off it in the Hürtgen Forest. 47 years after the private called it a plumbing supply. 47 years of wars and technology revolutions and complete transformations of the American military. The same gun, same $20 stamped steel, same loose tolerances, same wire stock, still trusted. Because the desert sand that grinds into precision mechanisms and brings high-technology weapons to their knees has never figured out how to stop a gun that was designed to not care about contamination. The Army finally officially retires the M3 in the mid-1990s. They hold a ceremony, put one in a museum, give speeches about the evolution of American infantry weapons. There are rumors, persistent and cheerful, that certain tank crews kept one tucked away off the books just in case. Old habits die hard, and some habits are old because they work. Michael Omali lived to see all of it. He watched the Korea footage and recognized the sound. He watched the Vietnam news reports and saw the shape he knew. He saw the Gulf War coverage and felt something he couldn't quite name when he spotted the familiar silhouette in the background of a news segment. He tried to explain it to his grandchildren. Try to make them understand why a gun that looked like a toy, a gun that rattled when you shook it, that had visible welding seams, that was made by the same division that made headlights, was actually the best weapon he ever carried. It wasn't pretty, he told them, sitting on his porch with rough hands folded in his lap. It rattled. It looked like junk, but when you were in a hole and the world was ending, it was the only friend you had that didn't quit. He died in 1998. His service rifle wasn't mounted on the wall. No captured Luger in a display case. No medals under glass. His legacy wasn't an object. It was a lesson. The lesson is this. You don't judge a tool by how it looks in the showroom. You judge it by how it works in the mud. By whether it fires when you need it to fire in conditions that no designer sitting in a warm office could fully anticipate. By whether it's still working at the end of the shift when everything else is broken down. The story of the M3 grease gun is the story of American industrial ingenuity at its most honest. Not the chrome and computer chips. Not the precision machining and the tight tolerances. The other kind of ingenuity, the kind that looks at a problem, strips away everything unnecessary, and welds 2 pieces of stamped steel together to get the job done for $20. The kind that builds something disposable and watches it become immortal. The grease gun proved that disposable doesn't mean weak. Mass production has a quality all its own. The best weapon in a dirty war isn't the one with the tightest tolerances or the finest finish. The best weapon is the one that fires when you pull the trigger. No matter what. We dig for these stories because they tell the truth about war that the parades and the monuments leave out. The truth is mud and cold fingers and a gun that rattles in your hands while the world ends around you. The truth is a $20 tube from a headlight factory holding the line at the Battle of the Bulge. If this story gave you new respect for the ugly duckling of the American arsenal, hit that like button. It helps us keep digging. Subscribe if you want more. The planes that flew with half a wing, the ships that refused to sink, the weapons and the men who refused to quit. Drop a comment. Tell us, would you trust a $20 gun with your life? Thanks for watching. We rescue these stories to make sure Mike Omali and his disposable gun don't disappear into silence. We'll see you in the next one.